It is the 6 o'clock hour, and I'd like to bring the meeting to order. City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission, regular meeting, August 24, 2021. Due to COVID-19, this will be both a physical meeting location and a virtual meeting per Washington Proclamation 20-28. Meeting may be viewed live via YouTube. To leave a public comment that will be made part of the meeting record, please call and leave a message at 360-279-4512. Once again, the number is 360-279-4512. The first item on the agenda this evening is roll call. Let the record show that Commissioners Southard and Bates are absent, and that Commissioner Schott is via remote. Second item on this evening is the approval of the minutes, July 27, 2021. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from the July 27, 2021 meeting.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item 3, there has, to this time, been no public comment left for us to share with you. So we'll go on to item 4, which is our public meetings and hearings. And the first item is a continuation of the public hearing that I opened at the last meeting, horizontal mixed use. And Associate Planner Ray Lindenberg is going to take us through the remainder of this, and perhaps we will come to a conclusion this evening. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me confirm that my voice is coming through okay.
Yes, it
I
is.
see a thumbs up, so that's good. Okay, I'm going to kind of briefly go through a little bit of the background and everything. I know we have a new planning commissioner with us tonight, and so I would like to give you a little bit of the background, but without going too far into the weeds. And if there are any questions, of course, as always, let me know, and I'm happy to stop mid-sentence and help you out, because we're here to try and get things, taken care of as far as getting some better zoning code for the city. So definitely stop me if you need to. I'm going to start sharing my screen here with a presentation as well, and then you don't have to read along with it too much. I'll be kind of explaining things and going back to the reference of your packet there, where we provided you some attachments that have the text. I'll reference that, and we can discuss that as well. I do want to note that the name of this project kind of changes and morphs and adds on new words. I've now changed it again to mixed use standards instead of horizontal mixed use, and land use matrix and definitions. And we have a draft ordinance before you tonight. I did get some feedback from our city attorney, and he stated that he does not see any issues with it. There is going to still be some kind of fine tuning possible as we discuss this tonight, and as staff will go over the draft ordinance between now and the time it goes to city council, in case there's any misspellings and things like that. But pretty much what we have here is the 99% version. So we'll be discussing that tonight. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. So going into a little bit of the background, again, this process is viewed as a continuation of the work that we started on the Central Business District. That work started out as kind of design guidelines and some of the more detail-oriented things. We ended up going through and making some pretty significant changes to the code and how it works within the Central Business District zone district itself. We talked about having the idea of the activated streets, the concept of having people being able to interact with storefronts. The active facade concept came through, and then we also went through the use list and trimmed that down, took a lot of the kind of fat, if you will, off of it, and made it so that it was a lot more streamlined and a lot more flexible and a lot easier to explain to people what it is that we're allowing for in the downtown area. So the second key thing here is mixed uses have always been allowed, or at least have been allowed in the recent past in the Oak Harbor Municipal Code, but only in a single building. And that applies for anywhere that we've allowed mixed uses in the past, whether that's in the central business district or if it's in a C3 zone district. We have allowed mixed uses, but every time it has to be vertical. And what that means is anytime you have a residential space, it has to be above a commercial space of some sort. And generally that's kind of accepted to be retail, but it can be other uses. But the fact is that it has to be in one building. And that honestly has restricted interest in it. And it's created situations where some properties and some property owners have attempted to kind of make that work for them, and it just doesn't sometimes, because you have properties that are, deeper than they are wide, and so you have commercial spaces that end up being kind of buried in the back of a parcel somewhere, and few commercial businesses will want to utilize that space. And then the third thing is the relationship between uses and districts, and the difficulty in comparison of different districts and what uses are allowed due to the formatting of the code. The way the code is written, we have separate lists in each different zone district, and you have to compare between all of those, and it's difficult. And what happens is when some of those zone districts get revised, you have situations where very similar uses end up with slightly different names. And so we have a use list that has 250 different uses in it, which really isn't necessary and isn't good for anybody. So from our last meeting, we talked about a number of things, and these four things, these four items are going to be kind of the basis for, or an outline for the discussion tonight. We have our mixed use standards, we have the land use matrix, we have the 2A, which is the existing uses in the matrix form, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Supporting definitions, number 3, and number 4, the strike through text. So standards for mixed use developments, that's attachment 1. That's kind of the main reason that we started this whole process, was the concept of allowing for horizontal mixed use. And so what we did is we talked about different ways that horizontal mixed use may appear, and then tried to best craft an ordinance that will allow for those horizontal mixed uses. And horizontal mixed use in this situation, as you'll see in your attachment 4, are uses that are differentiated. You have residential and commercial uses on the same parcel of land, but not necessarily in the same building. And so we have our purpose statement in there, and that's to allow for greater flexibility within those districts. And then we have also the concept of, providing for more residential density and, possibly more affordable housing, and those areas that might function as a node for a larger neighborhood within an area. So that's the purpose and intent, essentially, of allowing for mixed use. The permit process, what we do is we say that those mixed use developments shall be approved under a binding site plan if those include any separate ownerships, buildings, parking areas, common facilities, things like that. If we're still looking at just one building on one site, they will be able to do a site plan, just a standard site plan. But if we're looking at different ownerships, including condos and things like that, the binding site plan will be the path that we will choose for that. And then we have standards for all mixed use projects. And these are all of your mixed use. If it has 2 different uses on the same parcel of land or within the same building, there are standards for those. And we have our standards for the vertical mixed uses. And generally what you're going to be looking at is those standards are very similar, because they were taken essentially from what our existing standards are for our mixed use buildings, which are all vertical. And then the new information is going to be your standards for horizontal mixed use. And pretty much what we're looking at there, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail because this is the new stuff, is we're looking at the concept of providing landscaping as a buffer and as protection, essentially. If we have a parcel of land that is proposed for horizontal mixed use, and the developer wants to develop residential uses on essentially the back part of the lot, the area that's furthest away from the street, then we are requiring landscaping on the frontage to prevent the weed patch effect, essentially, where you're planning on building a commercial building, but it doesn't happen for 10 years and just becomes a weed patch. And we want to avoid that. And that's something that a long, long time ago, I had a PowerPoint presentation, or excuse me, a Google Earth presentation for you, where I showed how that had happened in a couple of different locations, where the developer had gone through and built a very successful residential community set back from the main road, but along the main road was dirt and weeds and just open space for a significant amount of time. And that's what we want to avoid. We're going to require that the landscaping be installed at the same time so that we don't have unattractive nuisances lining a commercial street. Another key concept there is to require treatment for preventing of dust and erosion, negative impacts. So it's either going to be mulch or it's going to be ground cover or something along those lines. We also want to make sure that the design did not have loading docks, garages, and blank walls facing the street, just as we do now. It's part of our design regulations and guidelines, and it's something we feel very strongly about. We want to make sure that even if we're allowing for new uses and different kind of ways of building things in the city, we still want them to be attractive, and we still want them to meet the standards of what we've set going back to the development of the design regulations and guidelines document. Separate parking that is designated for residential units on site is required. That's also kind of a key component there, is to make sure that you don't have a situation where parking is being taken up by somebody's second, third, or fourth vehicles, and all of a sudden we don't have enough room for our commercial tenants to have parking spaces. And then finally, one of the key concepts also is to set aside land that is adjacent to the public right-of-way for commercial uses. And essentially what we're saying there is that even though this parcel is zoned commercial and we're allowing you to build residential, we are still going to require that that commercial area be reserved. And the reason for that is otherwise we're doing essentially a de facto rezone without going through the process that's required with public comment and the comp plan amendment and all the things that go along with rezoning something from commercial to residential. And so that reserve area is going to be, you know, the area that has to be landscaped if it's going to be in a separate phase, but it needs to be set aside so that that commercial space is still there. And that's kind of a key component. Again, like I said, we don't want to have a de facto rezoning situation. If somebody wants to rezone their commercial property to residential and use it for 100% residential, then that's a process they can go through. We can still do that. But if they're going to be developing a horizontal mixed use, we want to make sure that it is truly mixed use development. The minimum density for dwelling units per acre is not set. And the reason for that is that, for instance, say somebody wanted to develop a small apartment building or row houses or condos or something on an existing commercial site. We're not going to tell them that they have to do, you know, X number of units per acre, because that pretty much would kill a project. If there's some extra land that's not being utilized for whatever reason, whether it's not good commercial land because of access to major roadways, visibility, et cetera, and it would be used better utilized as residential, then let's let them do that. Let's give them the flexibility to do that. Let's increase the number of residential units we have in the community. Your maximum density is going to be 30% greater than that of the R4 zone district. And the reason that we did that is to offer kind of a bonus, an incentive to provide some residential uses, or units rather. And that 30% comes from the PRD development standards that allow for up to 30% density increase. And we're also, you know, saying that you have to have that first 100 feet along the arterial, or along the street right of way. And so we're kind of taking away potential for construction of units, but we still want to maintain the ability to have a good number of residential units on a parcel. And then finally, easements established for providing access, utilities, stormwater, and other facilities have to be approved for all phases before construction begins. because we want to make sure, again, that all these things are going to fit together and we're not going to have problems coming down the road. And that's part of the binding site plan process. So moving on to number 2, attachment number 2, which is your land use matrix. And land use matrix, came about because we started thinking about ideas of what uses are allowed in the downtown area in the CBD. And so this all kind of came together at the same time. They seem unrelated, but it comes together at a point where you recognize the method to the madness, essentially. So in the land use matrix, we're overhauling the presentation of the regulations. We're not changing regulations. We're not changing what's allowed in different zone districts other than the horizontal mixed use. And we've developed this as a means by which that we could relate uses that were similar but phrased differently. In other words, there are zone districts allowed for a retail, bookstore. And then there is another zone district that says bookstores. And so some of these terminologies got kind of crossed up or very similar, et cetera. And so the determination was we don't need to do that. We can say that a small retail establishment can be a minor retail or a major retail if it's over 12,000 square feet. And some of these things get grouped together because, to be perfectly honest, from a zoning standpoint, it doesn't matter what you're selling inside that store as long as it's not creating noxious fumes or other negative impacts into the area. And we have other ways of regulating that. So we feel that this, when you apply it to the code, it improves the efficiency of how the code works, how we relay that information to other people, and it makes it easier to understand. And so we have, again, different sections within the land use matrix. We have a purpose and intent section. We have all the different sections. And kind of going back through, we talked about the horizontal mixed use discussion. The mixed uses were still allowed. But what this does, what the matrix does, is allows us to better see the zone districts and the relationships between them. Because when you have the list of uses right next to each other from a C1 to a C3 zone district, you can see how they work together and why it is that perhaps you might allow for something in the C1 district that you wouldn't allow for in the C3 district or vice versa. And so when you have them sitting right next to each other with that P for permitted, you can see that. Whereas if you have to flip back, virtually flip back different pages and see what's allowed in different zone districts, it makes it a lot more cumbersome for staff and for developers, citizens alike. So that is part of the key reason, is to make things easier to understand. We talked about a long time ago with the Affordable Housing Task Force is to streamline how the code works and how permitting works, and this is part of that. So in attachment 2, I mentioned before, I kind of jumped ahead of myself there, but we have a purpose and intent statement. And the purpose of this section is to provide a comprehensive listing of the permitted uses within individual zone districts. Then we have a list of permitted uses, we have an explanation of permitted uses. And that just states that uses that are permitted within the land use matrix shall be developed to the density standards of the underlying zone district and the design criteria that are found within the municipal code and the DRG. And so what that's telling you is you still go to the R1 zone or the C5 zone to determine what your setbacks and your building heights and all of those details are. But if you go through this matrix, you can see what the uses are allowed. So there's kind of the separation between uses on one hand that go in the matrix and the physical form and the details of what the building is in the actual zone district. We have a section for accessory uses. We used to have, again, all of these different permitted uses, accessory uses, conditional uses, all appeared as separate sections within each of those zone districts. That led to kind of weirdness going on, where you'd have very similar things that weren't exactly the same, but the wording was a little bit different and it became confusing and difficult to work with. And one of the things that we did when we did the changes to the central business district was to remove the distinction between accessory permitted uses and permitted uses, because that's what was creating issues with the large project that was appealed ultimately on Pioneer Way, is what was accessory and what was permitted and what makes something accessory to a permitted use. And so all of those things were so subject to various interpretations by different people, it created issues. And so we have a list of accessory uses now, and this list applies to all different zone districts. And it talks about sheds and non-commercial gardens and parking and storage buildings and all those sorts of things. So you can apply them to each zone district. Same thing with conditional uses. Uses that are listed as conditional within the land use matrix are subject to the standards of 1967, which is specifically dealing with conditional uses. We have a section for prohibited uses. And those are generally your uses that are creating noise, odors, waste, other byproducts that would contaminate the environment, etc. They're very general, they're very broad, and they apply to all zone districts. And this is how it was before, except it said it 12 different times, one time in each zone district. And so we're consolidating, we're making things simpler, but it's still saying the same thing. Uses in the shoreline jurisdiction, that is in the Shoreline Master Program. We don't need to repeat it here. The previous, or the existing code has a whole list of things that are allowed in the shoreline jurisdiction. That's also in the Shoreline Master Program. We shouldn't have to repeat it, it's already there. And then finally, the matrix itself. And the matrix is approximately 3 pages long. I tried to pare it down to 2 pages, and maybe with some formatting we can get there, but it makes it a lot more simple. It has C for conditional, P for permitted, makes it pretty straightforward and simple. There are some asterisks in there that will be addressed through further review with our staff and attorneys. But there is a simplicity to this, and you can go through and look across one way and look down this way, and you can see exactly what uses are permitted or conditional in a zone district, and you can compare it to a zone district that might be next door. Say, for instance, you want to operate a certain type of business and you're located in the C1 zone district, but it's not allowed there. Maybe you can consider rezoning to a C3 because it is, and you can see that right there. But these things just become a lot more simple, a lot more streamlined for everybody, including staff and the public. So attachment 2A. I only put attachment 2A in there as kind of an illustration of what it is we're dealing with right now. It's not going into the code. It's not appearing anywhere. It's not part of the code. It's not going to be in the code. It's just an illustration of what uses we have in our code right now and how much we've been able to trim, as far as talked about trimming the fat. And so we have 1, 2, 3, let's see, how many pages do we have? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pages of this matrix. So we've gone from 11 pages worth of matrix uses down to 3. And that's the illustration there. That's literally the only reason I put that in there, was to show you how much we were able to remove out of the code. If we had organized things in the same way, this is what we're taking out. And it also shows you that we're not really changing any of the uses that are occurring in these zone districts. We're just changing how we're presenting them to you. We went from about 250 uses down to 85. And again, it's not going to appear in any code. It's simply a reference point for you. So attachment 3. Attachment 3 are your new definitions. And I like to beat the drum of having simplicity. And then I added 28 new definitions. And I apologize for that, but it was necessary. We wanted to make sure that everything was covered. And there were a lot of things, again, that were open to interpretation. So we put a bunch of new definitions in there to cover all aspects. When we're dealing with automobile repair, when we're dealing what a conference center is or a community service, we want that to be in there so it's perfectly clear. This is where an automobile repair place can be, and this is what an automobile repair place is. And in that way, we don't have any kind of interpretations, any halfway gray areas. things like that. We're trying to avoid that. We're trying to make things perfectly clear and easier to understand for everybody who's involved in the process. Finally, attachment number 4, we have existing zone districts. The use lists have been removed. And so essentially this is your strike through. We've taken the new section that was in attachment 2, which is your land use matrix, and the kind of preface that goes with that talks about, permitted uses, conditional uses, et cetera, and the matrix itself. We're inserting that into the code, and then we're removing all of those separate lists that appear in the separate land use, those separate zone districts. And so when we take out all of the permitted uses and all the conditional uses out of each zone district, because they're already there in the new matrix. And so that's why that's included in there, just to show you this is what we're taking out because it's being replaced by the matrix itself. So where we're at right now, we talked to you last time back in May about conceptual language and ideas. We've come to the point where we've polished those ideas and gotten them into a format that meets standards of what's legal as far as zoning code is. And so this is our draft for Planning Commission, City Council, and the public review. We talked about inserting sections. We talked about putting in the new horizontal mixed use, or excuse me, the mixed use standards themselves. Talked about inserting the matrix and inserting new definitions. And then we also talked about removing those sections that are no longer needed. And those are the use lists in each of the zone districts. So the next steps, one of those is underway. That we have the Department of Commerce review and SEPA review is going on. And then we're going to have solicitation of further comments. We have not had any comments on it yet. And then we'll have a final draft ordinance adoption. And what we're looking at right now is essentially a kind of step forward or a recommendation to move forward with that to the City Council based on the language that we have now. And our intent is to have that before the City Council, the first meeting in October, if everything looks good to you folks. And all of those other steps in there that are shown on there will be taking place in the meantime. So with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation. Hope I haven't gone on too long, and then answer any questions you might have.
So Ray, is there you're going to continue to work on this, wordsmithing, et cetera, but this is probably the last time that we as a body will see this, is that correct?
That is the intent. However, if there are further discussions that you would like to have regarding this, we can certainly do that. I feel like I've kind of beaten it to death, and I don't want to continue to bring this dead horse back, every month to you folks. So I feel like we're there where we need to be to move it forward, to get it to the City Council and decision makers, because I think we're polished, we're good to go. There's going to be some fine tooth comb stuff to make sure it's not referencing code sections that are in the wrong place, things like that. But other than that, it is, like I said, the 99% version of this.
Do we have any questions for Ray?
Yeah, I have 2 questions and a comment. My 2 questions are, when you're talking about specifically the horizontal mixed use and having that commercial area landscaped and reserved, is there a time limit on how long they have to develop that commercial area? And then my second question is, just out of curiosity, marijuana, is that minor retail? My final comment is, assuming that this matrix is for public consumption, it might throw your formatting off a little bit. Is it possible to have headers at the top of each page? I mean, if you're going to the second page, you're not going to see, C3 or anything like that. So,
Okay. With regard to your first question, with regard to landscaping and that space, we do not have a time limit on that. And the reasoning for that is we understand that, for whatever reason, whether it's the economy or, demand for, whatever type of space, that might not be the case, that it might not make financial sense for somebody to build a building. And we would rather have a nicely landscaped area in front of a residential district rather than an empty building in front of a residential district. And so that's why the landscaping, that is the requirement. That's the key requirement, is to have that landscaping in there to prevent, derelict buildings, essentially. We don't want to have to require somebody to build a building that's not needed. And so that's why that comes in. Your second question about, I believe the second question was about marijuana.
That's
The
correct, yeah.
marijuana standards are in a separate section in the code. They are guided by state requirements. And no, it would not, well, it would be a minor retail, but it's still only allowed within certain areas. And again, the section, I believe it was the first or second section in the matrix, talks about how things still have to fall under the requirements of the underlying zone. And then also when you have special uses like marijuana and other businesses that are regulated in special ways, those requirements still are in place. This doesn't supersede anything.
So just a clarifying question then. So if I were to get a piece of property and build some residential units on the back area of it with the quote unquote intent of having the commercial area in the front, I could conceivably never put any commercial up there and just have the residential area in the back, as long as it's landscaped.
Conceivably, yes, conceivably you could do that. The thing about it is we would require, as part of the binding site plan, again, or as part of the standards of the horizontal mixed use, is you reserve that front area for commercial uses. As part of your binding site plan, it would be a separate parcel. And so at some point, if you wanted to, you could sell that off to somebody else to come in and develop it for you. Or again, it might just remain as a nice little park area. Either way, what's happening there essentially is you've found that the demand for the commercial space does not exist. And if the demand for the commercial space that's been reduced down to 100-foot frontage doesn't exist, then what we would have had before this code was in effect is an entirely empty commercially zoned property without any residential on it either. So we feel that that is still a net benefit.
Any other comments, questions? All right. Eric? Sarah?
Thanks. Sorry, it's a little difficult to hear the name call. Can you all hear me okay? Great, thanks. Thank you, Ray, for that presentation. It was great. I have a few questions based on notes from your presentation. I hope of your patience with folks as I go through a few of these questions. So I was wondering if we've done a great job of putting everything into this matrix. And I found myself kind of going back and forth between our map of zoning and the matrix. Do we have any examples, either mock-ups or maybe just even photos from example streets around the nation on what we would, in an ideal world, what the new kind of permitting and zoning would look like if we were to see a fully built out block? It'd be really helpful to kind of see what this might look like in terms of transitioning, so between blocks or between zones. And because there were a few things where I was like, oh gosh, if you're if you're not facing Pioneer but you're in the CBD, what would that look like? Would you have to have a retail component there, even though you're not on Pioneer, but you're trying to build housing? It would just be lovely to see some mock-ups. So I think we can, as a community, maybe engage the public more on what this would look like in practice. I think you're muted. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So part of our presentation before you were on the Planning Commission was I went through and showed several examples. I think it was 4 or 5 examples from other communities of how horizontal mixed use has worked, different types of projects and things like that. What you're referring to is the vertical mixed use, the downtown stuff, the Pioneer Way, the Central Business District stuff. And there are, it is entirely different animal, if you will. When you're talking about having, stacked uses where you have that commercial space on the bottom and you have your residential above, that is the requirement on Pioneer Way. That has been the requirement on Pioneer Way for quite a while. When you step away from Pioneer Way, when you go onto Bayshore and you go on to Fidalgo and some of the, back streets, if you will, then some of those requirements they drop away because you have the CBD 1 zone district and the CBD 2 zone district. For instance, the large parcel that's on the corner, the southeast corner of Ely and Barrington. If you can imagine that parcel, it's across from the thrift store on Barrington. That is in CBD 1 or 2, and I can't remember, don't quote me on that, but it is in one of those 2. And it does allow for residential to be the dominant or only use on that property and therefore be on the ground floor. So if somebody wanted to come in and build 100 units of residential on there and have 0 commercial, they can do that by right now. And we're not doing anything to change that. The key thing that we went through with the Central Business District revisions was we were trying to protect the commercial interests and the kind of visual interest along Pioneer Way itself. When we step away from Pioneer Way, we understand that there is kind of a different scene, if you will. There's more demand for residential, and it makes more sense to have residential on the ground floor or not require commercial. So we're kind of dealing with 2 different animals there. The horizontal mixed use, I would be happy to go through. It actually worked really well to do like a visual kind of tour via this medium. So I'd be happy to do that for you and anybody else that wanted to see that again. But we have examples of the horizontal mixed use. And I can show you exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about weed patches and things like that too. So I'm happy to help you out with that.
Thanks. Next question I had was regarding landscaping requirements, both for new buildings. Like you talked quite a bit about the landscaping requirement. I remember in a past meeting, as the Planning Commission, we were talking about essentially stormwater runoff and impacts of that. And, the city has invested so much in the sewage treatment plant. Do we have anything in the code right now that would ensure that landscaping that goes in has a requirement or a component for rainwater catchment?
Yes, we essentially all of our projects right now are built around stormwater. The state has put certain standards on us. We are required to do a number of different steps that the state has for requirements. And so a lot of our projects, honestly, like I said, are built around the stormwater, and none of that changes. Again, it's all in the underlying zoning and the underlying process that all projects have to go through. And so, yes, we have stormwater detention facilities, we have underground cisterns, we have rain gardens, we have all sorts of different tools to use for that, and it's baked into our code from the start.
Okay, thanks. On public parks, there's a number of zones that don't require, it looks like we don't have in there the ability to put in public parks. Wondering if we're increasing density, even in areas where we have our highest density, wouldn't it make sense to have the ability to put in pocket parks or like a dog park, these sort of things as like neighborhood amenities that encourage more development in that area, or help us with water retention in areas? Do we have any flexibility with those spaces to not build a whole new huge public park, but have pocket park or other sort of amenity areas that are public?
Yep, our code requires that, and there are processes by which there are certain percentages of landscaping required. And also in our design regulations and guidelines, it talks about amenities and open space and landscape requirements. It's another thing that's baked into the code. As far as public parks from the traditional standpoint of a city-owned park, that generally falls to the city to purchase land and build a park. And that's something that we've gone through, we're doing with the Harbor Heights project. Typically, I think the city has kind of gotten out of the business of building parks in a traditional sense, and we lean on developers to, set aside land within subdivisions, the traditional pocket park like you're thinking of. But also when you're thinking of a more dense kind of urban type environment, we do have requirements for setting aside landscaped areas and amenities for the residents, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like while there's a possibility that a park could go in, it would have to be a privately financed and probably only accessible to the residents type of amenity, unless it's like a curb cutout or curb area.
Like I said, I think we're talking about kind of two different things. You're talking about like the traditional city park versus the open space that's set aside for residents. I think, and I don't speak for people who wrote the code and dealt with this in the past, but I think the concept was there is to make sure that we felt at the time that the number of city parks and the access to those city parks was adequate from the standpoint of, basic amenities like ball fields, playgrounds, stuff like that. Whereas if developers provided kind of the more micro scale stuff for the residents of those specific subdivisions, then that kind of picks up the rest of what's needed as far as open space and parks are concerned. Now, we have an open space and parks plan that we can talk about. That's within our comprehensive plan that talks about what spaces are needed and what kind of facilities are needed and things like that. And the city works on providing some of those things. But as far as like these types of projects, we're more focused on the open space for the people that are within that, whether it's apartment building or et cetera, because they're the ones who are immediately affected. Like they can walk out their door and have the open space. Whereas some of those larger, more traditional city park things are addressed in other ways.
Yeah, I would just bring up that as like Oak Harbor densifies, as more people want to be able to have mobility on foot, that would create perhaps an equity issue in terms of what you can get to nearby. If you're not living in the nice new complex, if you're not in the nice new housing development, that might mean that you have to hop in your car to get at City Beach or the other park, right? Instead of having maybe a small like eighth or quarter of a block that you can walk your dog and that your dog can get some relief, that sort of thing, I think is seen here. And then on the kind of center of town CBD zones, was there any thought of what is being zoned here lining up with the opportunity zone that sits between Pioneer, Highway 20, and Midway Boulevard?
There was not. The opportunity zone is based on a census tract, which we have no control over. And so that census tract, unfortunately, is kind of oddly shaped. And it excludes, again, unfortunately, excludes that large parcel of land in between Bayshore and Pioneer Way, because that's how the census tract was drawn whenever it was drawn, however long ago. So there wasn't a lot of coordination between those two things because, to be perfectly honest, it didn't really change much. The opportunity zone is there and it's available for people to take advantage of. The zoning is there, and it's also a situation where if somebody wants to change the zoning, they can go through that process. But there's not coordination between the two because they're not that interrelated. There's developable potential whether or not either of those were there or changed. So I think that as far as when we looked at the CBD zone revisions, we were focused more on what was happening on Pioneer Way itself and the uses and the physical characteristics of Pioneer Way.
Yeah, I would say that this probably requires another look at what the opportunity zone affords Oak Harbor, because unfortunately, the opportunity zone tax credit is mostly known for the capital gains write-off for developers. However, there's a significant part of this federal policy that relates to businesses. Businesses that locate at least 70% of their business within an opportunity zone can write off a capital gain from a prior investment that they then took that equity and placed in the opportunity zone as a business. And then if they go to sell the business in 5 to 10 years, they can write off the capital gain again, which means that we have an opportunity in the center of town to both have housing and businesses that are attractive to investment. But if we're not looking at the zoning through the lens of, where could more small businesses come in? Because there's no minimum investment for opportunity zone. So somebody could be starting a, $50,000 investment in, putting together an axe throwing bar or something. And it could be a way to incentivize more infill, especially where we've got those weed patches, as you talk about. So I'd really encourage that we take another look at that policy and maximizing the value that we can in that awkward triangle that we've got because of the census tract.
And I think that our current zoning takes advantage of that. I think that having the mixed use opportunity, the vertical mixed use opportunity on Pioneer Way and the other mixed use opportunities in other places, even away from Pioneer Way, going further out into the triangle, if you will, are already there. And we anxiously await people to come in and take advantage of the opportunity zone because it is it's a big deal. And to be perfectly honest, I'm disappointed that we haven't had more interest in it, but I don't think it's because of anything that our zoning code says. I think it just has to do more with the fact that we have, I think that the opportunity zone was more envisioned, the presentations that I saw were more kind of big projects. And I understand that you're talking about small, no minimum, and that's fantastic. And I think we can focus on that as well. But I don't know that anything on our zoning code is creating any kind of impediment to utilizing the advantages of the opportunity zone. I think it's just either owners aren't aware of it or the right project hasn't come along or something along those lines. Because I think that our zoning, just from a professional standpoint, professional opinion, our zoning is primed to help people out to do that. I think that the flexibility and the ease in which we or just the flexibility that we included in the last round when we went through the CBD district makes it so that people can do a lot of things within the CBD district specifically. But again, our code has allowed for mixed use everywhere, all commercial zones in the past. And we're trying to make that easier too. So we're removing impediments now. And I think that we're primed and ready to go if somebody did want to take advantage of that.
I believe you. I just, because I'm hearing we didn't reflect on the opportunity zone and the tax advantages, and maybe there wasn't as much knowledge about the business piece. I kind of feel like I'm in a trust but verify situation, that we should maybe take another look at, is this going to create not just the opportunity to put in businesses along Pioneer Way in the CBD, but to increase infill and sort of making sure that we have a denser walkable walkable neighborhoods through that area where if somebody wants to take a 4-block walk, they can pick up a cup of coffee, they can go to a doctor's office, they can visit a friend, they can, take their dog to the pocket park that we have, that we've increased the street life and opportunities there. And that's something I'm hearing from you, like you think we've got in there. I just want to make sure that we do.
Like I said, it's my professional opinion that it's there and it's ready to go and ready to be taken advantage of.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Comment, anyone else? If not, I'll close the public hearing and then we'll ask for the question. Having no other input, I will close the public hearing. And now I will ask for a motion to send this to City Council, I believe. Anyone have a motion?
Ray, are we looking for a motion to recommend to the city council that we approve the mixed-use standard ordinance language? Is that what you're after?
Yes, I'm sorry, we didn't include a model motion there, but pretty much what we're looking for is a positive recommendation to forward the language as shown for the mixed-use standards, the land use matrix, and the definitions to the city council for review and approval.
I'll make the motion to forward to a positive recommendation to the city council to approve the mixed-use standards, also the land use matrix that's attached, as well as the definitions attached, and the draft ordinance.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Sarah? Sarah?
Yes. I'm voting in favor. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll ask for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. The next item was struck out. It was originally advertised, but then struck from the agenda. It was a CBD zoning code discussion, and it was a public meeting. The next item is the CIP updates, and this also is a public meeting, and Senior Planner Kak Kamak will give us a presentation. Kak?
Thank you. Good evening, Kak Kamak, Senior Planner. I hope you can hear me. I have a short presentation on the capital improvements plan. Just a continuation from the last meeting. I actually have the same presentation that I did last week, and I'll have the slides up here in a short while, and I'll go through some of the slides just as a refresher, because and then I'll go to the tables to just show you currently what projects are being discussed, what schedules are changing, and also give you a kind of view into some of the projects that may be considered as additions to this year's CIP. And this is all very initial stage, so we don't know how far some of these projects will go, what will make the cut. So this is just for discussion purposes only, and these are mainly at an idea stage at this time. So with that, I will, let me share my screen. So can you see that? My slide presentation? Okay, good. So I'll quickly go through what I shared with the Planning Commission at the last meeting. The capital improvements plan, which is right here, in the grand structure of all the comprehensive plans and the related plans. This is an exhibit from our comprehensive plan. So our comprehensive plan has several elements in it. All the ones in light yellow are the ones that are required by the state GMA. The dark yellow is community chose to have these elements in the comprehensive plan. And these plans are implemented by all of these sub-plans and regulations. So we have functional plans, transportation, stormwater, water systems, sewer, and all of our utilities, parks, recreation plans. We have regulations, development regulations, like the one you've been discussing that Ray has been talking to you about. We have shoreline master program, we have critical areas. We have a capital improvements plan, which is what we're going to talk about now, and we have what's called a transportation improvement plan. These are combined in the city of Oak Harbor. Some cities have these as two different plans. So our CIP is also our TIP. And then we have several sub-area plans, and then we have other studies and plans that also implement the comprehensive plan. So this is kind of a general structure of how policies and implementing regulations are related to each other, and how we get projects for our capital improvements plan, is through all these functional plans that look out 5 to 10 years or 20 years into the future to see what our system needs are. And then as we go through our capital improvement planning process, these things feed into the plan for 6-year implementation. So quickly to what's a capital facility. So we have the budget and we have capital facilities. There's a lot of projects that are under $50,000 that the city does. They're in the budget. The capital facility plan has only 50 lists or tracks the projects that are $50,000 and greater, and has a life expectancy of 20 years or greater. So that's what you'll find in this plan. So the goals are to, these are mostly derived from GMA and good planning principles, is to provide adequate services in accordance with policies and priorities, make sure we have financing in place, and we're doing the best cost-effective service within the city with annexations. Revenue sources, this is just right out of the budget document that we have. Several revenue sources feed projects and also determine what funds they go in. And so that's how most of our projects are classified or categorized. We'll go over them in a little bit. And these are just the what's in the document currently. These are just the chapters that are in there. So I've provided the link in the memo so you can take a look at that. So what's happening right now, and what are the changes that are being considered as we go through? So these are tables in the CIP. Like I said, most of these projects here are $50,000 or greater. And this is the streets fund. And these are the projects that are listed for the next 6 years. So the status of some of these projects, we've had an internal discussion with them. Most of the projects are moving along as planned. We have some minor changes. The SR20 and Facamar Road, this is the road that will hopefully take some safety considerations on Highway 20 as you're entering the city. That is actually being considered to be done this year, so we're actually going to be moving that project ahead. We've got some design that's already occurring. The active transportation plan will probably move to 2022. This is just because the state is overwhelmed with grant paperwork, and so we filed some paperwork with them, and it's just taking some time to get back. And so this money won't, and it's a state grant. This is all funded by grant, the $150,000. And so that will be coming in 2022. So that's the main two changes here. Other than that, most of these projects should be moving on schedule. Parks and Recreation, that's another fund that tracks all our park projects. We'll have some minor changes in probably the Windjammer integration plan. We had about a couple $1 million in 2022. We're noticing that projects are being done in small chunks at a time. We're not doing 5 or 6 projects at a time. It's just each project has its own process and interest groups. So what will likely happen is we'll kind of spread that over a period of 3 or 4 years, because we can see continuous improvements over the next few years. So we'll kind of break that out a little bit. These are playground equipments that have already been done or will be completed shortly this year. The Neil Park pickleball courts got in here because there was an interest group that wanted to work on it. However, I think they have facilities elsewhere, and they haven't. There was some donation money that was supposed to come from the pickleball group that didn't materialize. So this has been temporarily going to be taken off, and we'll put it back in when the interest picks up again. And then we have the Portland Blues, which we're going to probably install at Harbor Heights. So we're going to just kind of move that to a later date. The water system plan, most projects are going as planned. The sewer line replacements, they're going to push that out just 1 year. There's some design work that they're doing, and they'll probably follow up next year. So that's a minor change over there. Water system plan, they finished the Crescent Harbor Regatta water line lowering. Other than that, most projects are moving ahead. There's a couple of projects that were tied to development, private developers doing some work, and that has stalled. And so we're just going to push that out 1 year from a timing standpoint. Actually, let me, I'll continue. Okay, I'll come back to the new projects that we're considering for each of the funds once I go through the changes. Stormwater conveyance, most of these projects will get pushed out 1 year. Most of them are in design or in some sort of progression, just won't get done this year. So we'll push them all mostly out next 1 year. We have not many changes in the general government. Most projects are going as per schedule. And then we have the senior center, again, projects are going on schedule. And then we have the marina, also many projects going on schedule. We have a few projects that need to be pushed out a couple of years, the beach armoring and the stormwater improvements. This was a county-driven project, and they had some grant money for that. And then there was some changeover, and so we pushed that project out a little bit because it stalled a little bit. And that's all grant money. You can see the grant money dollars here. That's the revenue. So it's not the city money. And we have the Marina Boatyard acquisition. That's still, I think, an active project, just hasn't materialized. So we'll push that out 1 year as well. So what are the projects that are being considered to potentially add this year? So I'll go back to these tables, and I have the new projects on the right side here. The one project in streets, because the Harbor Heights project is moving ahead, the large park project, we need to build the transportation system around it. And one of the key streets will be the 16th Avenue extension to serve that. And so that's a fairly large project. It's a street that does not exist. It's a new street and will have to be built in phases. Will cost a lot of money and will probably depend on grants for a lot of that. So it's going to probably take some time to do that, but we should start planning for it. So one of the suggestions or recommendations is to include that starting sometime in 2024, because we've got Northeast 7th Avenue, which will take up the next 2 or 3 years in design and construction. And then 16th Avenue will be the next big street project that the city will be working on. So that's one of the recommendations that's come up so far. In parks, we have some windjammer projects that the new parks manager would like to add. There are some irrigation projects for Flintstone Park also that will meet the capital threshold of $50,000, so that's in there. Smith Park improvements. What the parks manager would like to do is to evaluate how the park is doing with the Gary Oak trees, and also find a plan to upgrade the gazebo and some of the playground equipment there. So it's going to involve some work and some coordination with the Gary Oak Society and the neighborhood there. So that's in there, and then some upgrades for, I think it's irrigation for baseball fields, and some renovation work at Volunteer Skate Park. So again, these are just ideas at this time, and I can't say what will make it and what won't based on funding and so on. So, but these are the ones that are currently kind of tracking at this point. No new projects for the water system suggested at this time, wastewater or water system, neither for the storm. We have, in general government, we have a new project to look at the parking lot just south of City Hall to see if we can improve it or expand it further. So that's something that's out there as an idea. And then we also have the senior center parking lot to consider. It has some ADA and some other critical improvements that need to be done, which also needs the pavement to be upgraded. So it starts to become a slightly larger project than just ADA improvements. So that is also tracking for inclusion in the CIP. So these are just starting ideas, and these are just what is floating internally. And I wanted to share that with the Planning Commission as we go through this year's update. We do this every year with our projects to see where we are. We're kind of mid-year right now, and time to adjust the schedules and so on, and that's what we're doing. So we will be coming back to the Planning Commission as we progress through this. So over the next couple of months, there'll be more ideas and more shifting of projects and so on. And so there'll be a few more changes, and we'll be coming back to you in November probably with a more updated table and project list to move forward. So just wanted to share what's happening with the CIP on that, and I will turn it back over to the chair for any questions and comments.
CAC, real briefly, can you tell me where the Seventh Avenue project is, and do we still have grant money in place?
Yes, it's the 7th Avenue project is, and I can share my screen. So the 7th Avenue project is under the streets, under table 501, and it's right here, Northeast 7th Avenue improvements. Right now, the cost is about total cost $4.2 million, and these are the dollars that are planned for expenditure with construction probably in 2024.
Okay, thank you, CAC. Commissioners, any comments, questions for CAC at this time?
Yeah, you mentioned briefly, can you elaborate a little more on the State Route 20 and Fakima improvement? That's on the very edge of city limits, if memory serve. You said it's for safety reasons they're adding that access road, or?
Yeah, so the properties that are fronting on Highway 20, once you get past Fakima Road, so the city owns the property that where we have a lot of Gary Oak saplings and trees. I mean, that's a property that will not be developed because the development rights have been bought by the city and the county and the Navy jointly. And so that'll be an open space. And south of there are some properties along Highway 20, and any access off of those properties onto Highway 20 is a safety concern just because of how Regatta Drive comes in and how Highway 20, they all kind of merge and they pick up speed there. And it's very difficult to safely have any viable business there. And so the best way to mitigate for that safety is to actually have an access that is not from the highway. And so the SR20 and Fakuma Road will, or the Boyle Property Access Road is what we're calling it, will be on the east side of the city-owned properties. And I don't have an aerial photograph. If you give me a second, I can try and bring that up. See if I can share the screen. So can you see that? So the access road, I believe, is to be built from Fakuma Road behind here to provide access for all of these properties here so that they don't have to take access off of 20.
Is there businesses that are looking to move into that area, and that's the reason that we're kind of putting this access road in for future businesses? Is that kind of the mentality there? I mean, are there businesses that have expressed interest there? I'm not aware of any that are there currently, so.
I'm sorry, my audio is a little echoing, so I didn't catch the question.
I was going to say, if memory serves, there's no businesses that I know of there currently. Are there businesses that have expressed interest in going there and we're building this access road for future use by them? Is that the thought process?
That is definitely an option. I think when we do consider development proposals, and maybe Ray can help me out here, we do have some development proposals in this area. And I think some of that consideration is to try, it's mainly timing. If a development comes in first and they want to go in first, they'll be required to build a road. If they are not moving anywhere, then the city has it programmed in the CIP, and so we can build a road and take that safety concern away. So it's kind of mainly timing.
So has there been thought of waiting for the businesses to go there so they can chip in to help out with that cost as opposed to the city taking the whole hit, or what's the thought process on that?
I think we have some requests for some businesses that want to go in. And again, Ray or Blaine can help me out here in terms of discussion in that with the developers there.
There is a current proposal for the U-Haul facility there, and part of that approval would rest on the road being built, and it depends on when U-Haul would start construction, as to who actually, commences the construction of that road. And I have not 100% involved in that decision making. That's the city engineer and the engineering staff that are dealing with that more. So
I can add a little bit more to that. In that, I think in writing what Ray's talking about, yes, the engineering and as part of the development and the civil plans, the city's showing that road being in there. The city has targeted transportation impact fee funding that expires if we don't utilize it for it. So it's a unique situation where the staff are recommending the city put in the road so that we can close the access there onto the highway for safety reasons, and we're committing to doing it as minimal as possible, but we're viewing it as benefiting multiple property owners, so it's targeted for the city putting that in there. So, and it's been approved and already in the capital plan for last year. So the council's blessed it a number of times. It's been there, and I think we're in the design stage right now for the road. And then the actual awarding of the contract will go to the council fairly soon. And certainly if the council wants to change directions, they can, but that's the direction of putting that in at city expense is the direction we're going in now.
Thank you.
Anything else for CAC? Well, thank you, CAC, and you'll have more for us in a couple months, I suspect.
Yes. We'll come back to you in November.
Okay. The last item on the agenda this evening is the monthly department update brought to us by Development Services Director David Kuhl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I have a report tonight that will go through a number of topics: current planning, long-range planning, administrative stuff, and the highlight tonight is Planning Commission training. I know that you've all asked for a lot of training, and I know you all want to see the in-person training that you all have become familiar with. Unfortunately, we're all wearing these little masks, and they don't really offer the in-person training. But we do have something almost as good tonight, which is Department of Commerce training, and there'll be some short videos for us to see a little later on. Update for the City Council action. The City Council has approved the Davenport Group, which is our new permitting software system. And we'll be able to process all of our building permits and land use permits through that. That'll be coming up, we'll probably have that finished in about 6 months. So staff is spending a lot of time right now telling this consulting firm how we do our permits currently, how we process building and planning permits, going through all of our process with Shoreline. And we have to build this from scratch, but once we get it done, we think it'll make us a lot more efficient. Current planning, the Scenic Heights building permits for model homes are pending, so we expect to have the developer submit bonds for those within a day or two. And so the building permits will be issued very soon for the 2 model homes at Scenic Heights. The same developer is working on the Hillside PRD plan. The civil plans have been approved, and that's your utilities and your infrastructure. We're also working on a development agreement right now with that particular developer between legal and engineering and planning. So that'll take us a little while to do, but we're making significant progress just recently. We have a new owner for the Gary Oaks development, which is D.R. Horton, and D.R. Horton is one of the largest builders in the country. So we anticipate that will go fast and successfully, just based on their sophistication. They're reviewing the plans now. They've just bought the project from the prior developer, and so they're seeing what they have left to do, and they'll be working through those particular procedures very soon. Marion Woods, that one I guess has been around here for a long time. That's off Swantown Road, 46 houses. The civil construction has begun, so the infrastructure has been started, which is exciting to see that that's finally making progress. In long-range planning, I sent a letter to the county on the joint planning area, where we always have our request every year to expand our joint planning area down south. We've requested that again last year because of COVID. It was not addressed. And so I just asked them to use the same application from last year and see if we can make some progress on that. We anticipate maybe a decision later this year to see if they'll support that or not. The Harbor Heights Park Plan has been working its way through the process. We've had some delays on that because there's been some road issues off Gun Club Road where we've had to get our engineers to work with the county and figure out how wide the road needs to be and what surfacing to put in and how to pay for all that. So it's still moving forward. It's just going to take a little longer than we had hoped. Administratively, we have a new building inspector who's also a plans examiner, and her name is Tamara Patterson. You might know her already. She lives here in town, and she's been with Island County for 20 years. So it's nice to get a real strong professional who's been at this a long time. We're excited to have somebody with a lot of experience come join us. Davenport, again, working through the process to get our new permitting system. We're implementing a new communication training in the month of September. So the Department of the Auditor actually puts on free training. And so we hope to do some communication training with our planning department, as well as bridging that with the engineering department. Historically, there were some challenges with that, but I think in the last 6-8 months, the communication's really improved between us and engineering. But we think that this training will help solidify it and get people working together even better. So I think we have training next, number 5. So Sarah, perhaps you'd like to load up the Department of Commerce video, or maybe Tim's going to do that for us. And then after that, I'll have a couple of updates on training, and the next Planning Commission meeting is September 28th. So this first one is 5 minutes long.
Welcome to the short course on local planning. Always free and open to all, the short course on local planning has been presented continuously in Washington community since 1977. It is coordinated by the Washington State Department of Commerce and supported by partners statewide. If you are a planning commissioner, this video series was created for you. It is also a source of basic information for staff, elected officials, and the public about land use planning in our state. The purpose of the short course on local planning is to help you understand the rules around land use planning in our state. You will learn about the elements that belong in your comprehensive plan and ways to implement the plan. This course will help you identify those situations in which you should be consulting your city or county's legal counsel to clarify the rules around content or process. You will understand how to make defensible decisions and develop an effective public engagement process. The Department of Commerce and our partners are pleased to present this online version of the course. We have asked several people who have been frequent presenters of the short course on local planning to record the following video segments for you. Let's start this short course by asking them to share their thoughts on why planning is important.
Think about all the types of planning we do in our lives. For example, companies develop business plans and strategic plans. We engage in financial planning and retirement planning. We even do wedding planning. So why do we spend so much time planning for so many different things? We plan because we believe we can achieve a desired outcome for the better. Businesses plan to become more profitable. We do financial and retirement planning to prioritize our needs and achieve a comfortable retirement. We do wedding planning to make weddings memorable, budget expenses, and to avoid unforeseen difficulties. So why should our communities, where we spend so much time to live, work, and play, be any different? Successful communities result from effective planning. Your community's comprehensive plan starts with a vision of the preferred future, which looks ahead at least 20 years. The vision and the plan's goals and policies guide local decisions to help your community achieve its desired outcome for the future.
Planning is important to protect and enhance the valuable assets that communities have, enhance their diversity and their accessibility. 3 quick examples are the system of trails and paths that were created by the city of Mill Creek since it's incorporated in 1983, and connects all of the subdivisions so that people can walk easily around the neighborhoods, and also connects to their new town center. That's the second example. The Mill Creek Town Center was a 15-year project, starting with visualization and implementation, and today it's a vibrant, thriving center that gave the city a new downtown core. And the third example concerns a waterfront hotel in downtown Seattle. Through good planning, a 9-story hotel was reduced to about 7.5 stories that still provided waterfront views from Victor Steinbrook Park in the market and still allowed the developer to have a functioning business.
Planning saves money. It will bring the community together to set priorities so you can direct your investment wisely. It will help you compete for grants and loans. And it will also establish a baseline so you can set up partnerships and collaboration to move your plan forward.
Community planning is important because local government is the laboratory for democracy.
Why plan? Each one of us has a stake in the future of our community. We all want to live and work in great places, but great places don't happen by accident. They happen because people take the time to ask, what's the best about our community that we'd like to protect and maintain? What's less good that we'd like to improve? What's missing that we'd like to grow? The comprehensive planning process is how communities answer these questions. Comprehensive planning is how people work together to make great communities. It's as simple as that.
Now you know about why planning is so important for our communities. So let's get started with this short course.
In the 1980s, Washington's legislators, local officials, and citizens became concerned about the rapid rate of growth and its effects. Between 1980 and 1990, the state population surged from 4.1 million to 4.8 million. Urban sprawl crept into rural areas, farmland was being lost, transportation improvements were not keeping pace with growth. Many natural systems were being degraded, and there was confusion and conflict about the respective roles of counties and cities. A commission was appointed by the governor to study growth management programs in other states. The commission made a recommendation to the legislature, and many of these recommendations were adopted as the Growth Management Act of 1990. The GMA sets forth 14 planning goals to guide cities and counties in preparing and implementing comprehensive plans. These goals are not listed in any order of priority, so it is up to each local government to consider and weigh all of them in the planning process. In addition to goals to provide general guidance, the Act also includes a number of very specific requirements which local plans and regulations must comply with. All 39 counties in the state and the cities in those counties must designate critical areas, which includes wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, critical aquifer recharge areas, frequently flooded areas, and geologically hazardous areas. City and county governments must also adopt regulations that will assure no net loss of the functions and values of these critical areas. In preparing these regulations, cities and counties are to use the best available science, either by undertaking original research or by relying on information that is available from state agencies. Forestry, agricultural, and mineral resource industries are key drivers of our state's economy. All counties and cities must designate such resource lands that have long-term commercial significance, and they must also adopt regulations to conserve those lands. Who must plan? Well, in addition to the duty to designate and protect critical areas and resource lands, 29 of the 39 counties shown on this map and the cities within those counties must fully plan under the Act, which means they have a number of additional requirements for how they plan. One of the most significant requirements for fully planning counties and their cities is to designate urban growth areas, or UGAs, with sufficient area and densities to accommodate the population that is projected for the coming 20 years. This map illustrates that at the countywide scale, all land that is not designated as urban or natural resource land is rural land. These are the three basic and mutually exclusive types of land in fully planning counties. The extent and shape of the UGA and many other regional decisions are made by the county after collaboration with its cities in development of what are called countywide planning policies, or CPPs. This regional policy framework ensures that city and county comprehensive plans are mutually consistent and that they work together to manage growth in a number of ways. In addition to being a mechanism for the county to designate urban growth areas, some counties have also used the CPPs to explicitly assign future annexation areas to adjacent cities. CPPs are also used to allocate 20-year population targets to each city to then include their respective comprehensive plans. Some counties have chosen to also allocate employment targets to cities. GMA requires that CPPs be adopted addressing the siting of public facilities of a countywide or statewide nature. These CPPs must also address the need for affordable housing and its distribution across the county. CPPs may also be adopted to address other issues that are regionally important. More than one contiguous county may choose to adopt multi-county planning policies, or MPPs. In the Central Puget Sound region, 4 counties and 82 cities have adopted Vision 2040, the Regional Growth Management and Economic Development Strategy. Vision 2040 constitutes MPPs for this region and addresses many topics, including climate change, high-capacity transit, regional growth centers, and the long-term metropolitan urban growth boundary. Each fully planning county and its cities must adopt a comprehensive plan with at least 5 required chapters, referred to in GMA language as elements. The land use element includes a future land use map. The map and accompanying text describes the general distribution, location, and extent of different land uses. This element describes population densities, building intensities, and estimates of future population growth, and it should also include policies for the protection of the quality of groundwater, management of stormwater runoff, and actions that are needed to mitigate pollution of waters of the state, including Puget Sound. The transportation element includes an inventory of existing transportation networks. It identifies existing needed improvements, as well as those improvements that will arise because of future growth. This element must address all modes of transportation, including transit, and it must include a bicycle and pedestrian component. The housing element includes an inventory of existing housing supply, describes how well supply meets current demand and future needs. This element should match future housing types and sizes with the economic means of current and future generations to secure housing. The utilities element considers the infrastructure needed to provide water and sewer capacity, power and telecommunications adequate to serve forecasted growth. The facilities and services described in this element include both those that are provided by the local jurisdiction or by others. The capital facilities element includes an inventory of roads, parks, public buildings, water supply and distribution systems, and wastewater collection and treatment systems. This element estimates the costs of providing these facilities over the life of the plan and must include detailed financing information for the coming 6 years. If the local government cannot pay for identified facilities, it must reevaluate the plan until the needs and the ability to pay are in balance. In addition, a fully planning county must also adopt a rural element. The rural element should define rural land use patterns and policies to protect rural character. A city or county may also choose to include optional elements in the comprehensive plan that are tailored to address unique circumstances or priorities. Some have chosen to include elements such as parks and recreation, economic development, urban design, or sustainability. A number of local governments have also chosen to include at the beginning of their comprehensive plan an overarching vision statement. The vision statement sets forth core community values and principles and provides a description of the community's desired future. The GMA has specific requirements for what each element must or may contain. However, every element usually consists of text, maps, tables, photographs, or diagrams. The text portion of an element typically consists of goals and policies. Goals are aspirational statements of high rank order, or they describe a desired future. An example might be maintain a sense of nature in a community. Policy statements, on the other hand, describe very specific actions or objectives needed to move the community in the direction of a stated goal. For example, a policy statement to serve the goal of maintaining a sense of nature might be something like measure the city's tree canopy, monitor its retention, and take measures that are needed to assure no net loss of tree canopy. Consistency is one of the key concepts in the Growth Management Act. GMA requires that the plan be both externally and internally consistent. External consistency means that your plan fits within the framework of state law, regional policies, and the plans of adjacent jurisdictions. In addition to complying with the goals and requirements of the GMA itself, a local comprehensive plan must also be consistent with any adopted countywide planning policies. The scope, manner, or degree of those regulations is determined by each jurisdiction. but in every case would need to give some substance to policies and direction provided by the plan. Some facilities, such as airports, correctional facilities, or sewer treatment plants, are difficult to cite, but are essential for the well-being of the region and its communities. The GMA has established that such essential public facilities, or EPFs, cannot be precluded by comprehensive plans or regulations. Local governments must adopt processes to review EPFs. They may impose reasonable permit conditions on EPFs, provided that such processes or such conditions do not operate to effectively preclude siting or expansion of an EPF. The Department of Commerce is the state agency designated to assist communities planning under the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Services Unit of the Department of Commerce provides assistance on the technical and procedural aspects of the GMA and coordinates this planning short course. The Department of Commerce is the state agency designated to assist communities to plan under the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Services Unit of the Department of Commerce provides assistance on the technical and procedural aspects of the GMA. Commerce does not certify local plans for development regulations. Instead, local plans and regulations are presumed to be valid upon adoption by the city or the county, and they may only be overturned if an appeal is filed and either the State Growth Hearing Board or a court determines that some aspect of that local action does not comply with the Growth Management Act.
Okay, that was kind of hard to hear at times, a little bit of a muffled sound, but hopefully you got something out of that. I know that was a fundamental, basic, comprehensive planning review, and you've seen that before, I'm sure, some of you, if you've been around the planning arena a while. Kind of what I got out of that was that there's, visioning is one of the concepts in comprehensive planning, and you notice that they talked about the Mill Creek Town Center. For those of you that have been there, that's really quite a phenomenal public market that they've built there. And it all started with visioning to begin with what they wanted to see occur, and it took 15 years to actually get that completed. So that's kind of what you're looking at when you're trying to redevelop downtown and other concepts like that. But I certainly open up the microphone to you to see if you got anything out of that, or if there's anything that struck you as particularly interesting or worthwhile.
All training is worthwhile as far as I'm concerned. Most of us has been on the commission for quite some time. We've had a lot of in-person where we have the ability to converse with other cities, whether it be counties, states, local authorities, on the various issues, the legal aspects and things like that. And I think that's where we've been missing a lot of it. Also, so much of it is the individual that sits at this diocese, has to take it upon themselves to review the documents, cross-reference the information that's in the code existing. And if we do that, and we all do it, then we come prepared, to hold a good meeting and to, answer the questions and ask the questions of the planners and of the various projects that come before us. It seems like over the last few years we've had a large turnover, and this is something you and I discussed, sometime before. We need some stability, to make this process work. And there's a lot of change coming to the city now that hasn't been coming this way in a long time. And it's really rather refreshing to see it. But it's also kind of scary in other aspects, because things we don't have control of is like traffic. And traffic is going to be the biggest burden I think we're going to face here in the not too distant future. David, can you tell me, do you know if the utility departments are stepping forward or stepping up for the infrastructure for these charging stations? Have you seen or heard anything like that?
Great question, Bruce. Charging stations are a big deal, and I know that there's some grant money out there for charging stations, but I'm not really sure if our utilities are out there actively seeking funding and projects. But that's a great question, which I can find out and see what they're doing. It's an interesting environment, those of you that have studied charging stations, private charging stations versus public, and how that's going to come together. In fact, there was an article in the American Planning Association magazine last month about charging stations. Do you all get that magazine?
All of a sudden, they've stopped. We don't know why. They were coming pretty regularly until about 4 months ago.
You used to get it until 4 months ago?
Until about 4 months ago, yeah.
Okay, well, let me take a look at that and see what's available.
The other question I had is, you might know some of this, is the various charging power supply stations at the dams. I believe there's a total of 6, and the Native Americans are trying to take down the dams, to allow for the salmon to be able to return to their habitat. But that's also our drinking water, and it's also our water supply, for everything we do, and also powers our electricity. And how is this going to impact us? I mean, we've already been told that we're in a semi-drought because of the Skagit River, where we get our water supply from, which also comes from the dams that set this up. But that's also the power we have. And if the Native Americans are trying to take out the dams, there's our water supply, our storage facilities. And that's something I've been reading a lot about recently, that's getting more and more traction. And it's also quite concerning.
Well, thank you for that input. We can sure do some research on the topic and bring it back to the commission just for your interest.
I just hate to see someone, get hit from behind. I know they talk about California, and I'm a former California resident, but their PG&E is a private company, and they have lost lawsuits because their power towers have started some of the fires. So they're shutting down the power supply, quite frequently. Well, the fires are doing the same thing right now, and there's also 2 power generating stations in Oregon that have been supplying power to California specifically, and they're also shut down. So they're getting hit from all directions. And then if we are doing the same thing, where's our power going to come from? Where's our water supply going to come from? And I just think it's a good question and something that needs to be looked at. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other comments? Oh, Sarah, you have?
Thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you for the training videos. And if there's a series that we can get a link to, so we can go through more of that content on our own time, or there's other resources that we can go through, please do share it with us. I know Sarah's also been working on that too, so thank you for putting that together. And then I had a question regarding something earlier in your presentation unrelated to training. And I apologize, sir, because of the video conferencing, I couldn't quite hear your name, and I can't see your face. But you mentioned that, I think this was also mentioned in the last meeting too, that there's a contract in place for a new permitting system with a vendor called Davenport. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks. So I would encourage the city to take a look at that contract and to make sure that in order to meet of more modern governance requirements, that that permitting data, so not like in the middle of the process, but anything that's essentially an end product from that permitting process, that we ensure that the city of Oak Harbor has what's called machine readable access to any data or documentation created. In my own work at Georgetown's Beck Center on government technology and government services, we see a lot of contracts that folks just don't know when they're signing it, that they may not have access to machine readable documents. And so the only thing they can get access to is like PDFs or a dashboard. They can't download their own information. And if you ever decide you want to leave Davenport, it might be difficult. I don't know if that's the case, but I would love to get some insight into how well this tool is going to work and adapt for modern governance needs, especially if you guys get public disclosure requests. I want to make sure that whatever they have is going to be responsive and allow the city to reduce time and cost burden, especially around public disclosure requests.
Good point, Sarah. Thank you for that input. We'll take a look at the contract and make sure that we're covered.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And thank you for taking us through those other points earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other comments this evening?
So, Mr. Chairman, I do have two trainings that are available to you. And they're both put on the same short course type thing that you've been through before. I think this is the stuff that Bruce is mentioning, short courses that are 3 hours long that you physically go to, and you get to interact with other planning commissioners and meet people. Unfortunately, they're not doing that right now, as you can obviously understand, but we do have trainings that are virtually live. So you'll get live trainers online. And this training, the first training, September 8th from 1 to 4. So that would be the afternoon training that would be available to you based on your schedule. The same training will be available on the September 30th from 6 to 9 p.m. So if your training schedule works better in the evening, you can get the same training through the short course at the Department of Commerce. We'll send out information to you. You do need to sign up for that one in advance. There's no fee for it. And if you'd like, we can register you. So if you'd like us to do that for you, we can do that. The two trainings, one is the legal basis of planning in Washington, the statutory basis of planning in Washington State, and early planning statutes, constitutional issues and land use planning. That's discussed by John Sitkin, attorney at law. I think he might have been on one of these videos tonight. Comprehensive Planning Basics by Ann Fritzell. She's a planner. What is planning and why is it important? The overview of Growth Management Act requirements for local planning. Then on that is also taught by, at another date, that's also Ann Fritzell is doing that one at both sessions. Roles and responsibilities is taught by two different people, Christina Woolman, a planner, and then Bill Grimes, who is also on the video tonight. That particular one is roles and responsibilities in the planning process, the process for public participation in local planning and best practices for effective meetings. So that might be good for the planning commissioners to see what the best processes are all about. Then the last section that they have is open government laws. One is put by John Sitkin, and the other one is Anne Marie Soto, both attorneys at law. The Open Public Meetings Act and Introduction to the Public Records Act. This training meets the requirements of RCW 42.30.205, requiring every member of a governing body to take Open Public Meetings Act training within 90 days of taking an official role, and every 4 years thereafter. And the attendees will all receive a certificate of training. So that's probably a critical one for us to attend for those of you who are either new or have not had training in 4 years. So if you'd like, we can send out an invite to all of you and just choose which day you'd like to go. And then Sarah and I will help coordinate that for you so that you can go.
Thank you, David.
You bet.
Any other comments this evening? As David said earlier, our next meeting will be September 28th, 6 p.m. There being no further business, the meeting's adjourned. Oh, Sarah, yes.
All right, I'll make it quick. I just wanted to flag a couple things for the commissioners. So one, last month in mid-July, NAS Whidbey, in partnership with the U.S. Geological Service, held, along with other bases in our region, a major earthquake drill. I had the good fortune of bumping into one of the USGS lead engineers on the project, and she filled me in on some of the scenarios that they were playing out based on data NAS Whidbey and USGS has of our area, including the off-base area. And while you might think like, gosh, that's like emergency services, I think that there might be a lot of, based on that conversation I had, I think that there might be a lot of good information that NAS Whidbey and USGS have put together on essentially our risk profile for earthquakes. That might include some updated data on the island, and that might help inform future planning and where we put certain types of development. It'd be really lovely to get that updated insight from two reputable sources like NAS Whidbey and USGS. So I'd encourage, I don't know who at the city might engage NAS Whidbey, but it would be great if we could do so to learn from their experience there. And then I served on the Affordable Housing Task Force or Committee, and I just wanted to flag as kind of one of the ongoing affordable housing access issues and why it's so important for us to have more nimble housing options available and to prioritize them. Several weeks ago, there was an apartment fire. It sounds like the apartment complex was a total loss, and several people lost their homes. I ended up engaging with folks who were trying to help those who were rendered homeless. And it sounds like, as of last week, most folks, if they weren't in the Navy, still remain homeless, just couch surfing with friends or with, the kindness of strangers offering up an extra bedroom in their home. But they're having such challenges finding more housing on the island that folks are thinking they might have to move off. And I realize that, we're not a social service committee sort of thing, but it does throw into, I think, stark contrast just how needed it is for all of this new planning around affordable housing and making sure that we are prioritizing that work. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Caught me in midstream there. Being no further